Very good afternoon, students. So from today we will learn about the bones of the abdomen and pelvis. So today's video is on the lumbar vertebrae. I have already told you about the typical feature or the general feature of a vertebra, and we have learned that a vertebra has two parts, that is the vertebral body and the neural arch. Now this is the vertebral body, and this is the after the vertebral body, the posteriorly this part is the neural arch, and neural arch consists of the two components, that is the pedicle and the lamina. So these are the lamina and pedicles. Okay, now there are the seven process. There are the seven process which takes attachment or origin from this vertebral or the neural arch. Okay. Now these are the four articular process, two superior and two inferior articular process. Then there is a spinous process and two transverse process. This makes seven process which takes origin from the neural arch or the vertebral arch. Okay, and then between the body and the vertebral arch there is a foramina, and almost this is a triangular foramina is there in the lumbar vertebrae. So these are the parts of a typical vertebrae. Okay, now we come to the lumbar vertebrae. There are 5 lumbar vertebrae, and out of these 5 lumbar vertebrae, the first 4, that is lumbar 1 to lumbar 4 vertebrae, they are typical lumbar vertebrae. That means their bony features, they resemble to one another. While the lumbar 5th, this is classified as an atypical vertebrae because its bony feature are different than the rest of the upper 4 lumbar vertebrae. So first we will learn about the bony feature of a typical lumbar vertebrae. So this is a typical lumbar vertebrae, and as I said, it has a body. So first I will describe you the body. Body is the kidney sap. That means here its side to side dimensions are more than its anteroposterior dimension. You can see here that it is just the kidney sap, both on superior as well as on inferior surface. Okay, so this is body. The body is very massive, strong. Okay, and this is because the body has to sustain lot of the weight. Okay, as it is transmitted, the weight of the head and neck, the weight of the thorax, the trunk weight, all has to go through the body and the intervertebral disc. So the lumbar vertebral bodies, they are much bigger as compared to the thoracic as well as the cervical body. See here, this is the thoracic vertebrae, 7 thoracic vertebrae. See the body, it is a small body, and then bigger than this is that the body of a thoracic vertebrae. But if you will compare here the body of the thoracic and the lumbar is much more bigger. Okay, it is quite massive. Right, see, this is the body. Now this body on the superior and inferior surface in living condition is covered by the hyaline cartilage, and then between the two adjacent bodies the presence of the intervertebral disc, which is a symphysial joint on superior as well as on inferior surface. If you will see the body from anterior and lateral aspect, this shows the concavity. Okay, this will show. The posterior surface of the body is almost flat. The surface of the body will show, on the anterior, lateral and posterior surface of the body. This will show the various foramina for the passage of the arteries, and veins, which will supply to the spongy bone of the body, spongy bone. Now the anterior surface of the lumbar vertebral body, they will give attachment to the anterior longitudinal ligament, and posterior surface will give attachment to the posterior longitudinal ligament. Now, there are the attachment of the muscles here onto the body. Okay, on the side of the anterior longitudinal ligament from the upper three lumbar vertebrae will be the origin of the crus of the diaphragm from right as well as from the left side, and still laterally this will give origin to that of the other muscles, okay, which we will learn later when I will teach you the particular features of these vertebrae, okay. Today we are just dealing with its bony feature, okay, the bony feature. So this completes the description of the body, which is kidney shape, and then we come to the second component, that is the vertebral body, vertebral arch or the neural arch, and this is made up of, as I said, by pedicles and that of the lamina. Now pedicles are strong. In case of the lumbar vertebrae, they are quite strong, attached onto the posterior surface of the body, directed backward, and then they are attached with that of the lamina. Okay, they will give attachment to the lamina. The lamina are a strong flat bone, very strong. It's not as thin as in the cervical, okay, or thoracic vertebrae. Here they are quite strong laminae, and lamina will meet each other in midline and will give a process which is called as the spinous process, okay, spinous process. Thus between the body and the vertebral arch there will be the presence of foramina. This is called as vertebral foramina, and in most of the vertebra, it is, especially in the lower vertebrae, it is triangular in shape. Here you can realize the triangular shape of the vertebral foramina. Right. Then there are the 7 processes as I said it. Now there are 2 superior articular process and 2 inferior articular process. If you will see the superior articular process, then you will see that in all the lumbar vertebrae from L1 to L5, okay, though we are just dealing with that of the typical L1 to L4, but this superior articular process, they are concave, okay, inside, that is medial facing concavity is seen. You can better realize with this. See this, where my tip of the finger is there, this is the articular facet which is facing posteromedially. So in all the vertebrae, okay, you see it from L1 to that of the L4 or even L5. See this. This is the L5 vertebrae where articular facets, superior articular facet, they are facing posteromedially. Okay, so the superior articular process as well as superior articular facet, they are quite strong. And if you will see the superior articular process and its postero-superior tip of there is a tubercle like structure is seen here. This one, see this, this is a tubercle like structure is seen here, and this tubercle is said to be the mammillary process, okay, that is the, in every vertebrae they will get this tubercle, and these are the this is the mammillary process. In L1 it is more prominent here. See, this is the mammillary process on the postero-superior aspect of the superior vertebrae, superior articular process. Then if you will see the inferior articular process, then you will see that their facet of the articular process, the facet, they are facing anterolaterally. This was facing, superior was facing posteromedially, and it was curved, concave. But here the inferior, they are convex, and their facets are facing anterolaterally, not postero. It is anterolaterally. The superior was facing posteromedially. So it is just opposite, because the superior will give attachment to that of the inferior facet of the upper vertebrae, okay, like this, okay. So this to form the facet joint. So they have to reciprocate their shape of the articular facet, okay. So the articular facets are like that. Okay, So these are the superior and inferior articular facet. In most of the upper lumbar vertebrae, the distance between the two superior articular process is more, okay, as compared to the distance between the two inferior articular process, right? Now, if you come to the second, process which is arising from the vertebral arch or neural arch, then you can see that this is the spine, and spine is quadrilateral. Okay, this is quadrilateral spine. A strong spine is here. It is not like that of the spine of a thoracic vertebra. See here, spine of a thoracic vertebra was long and directed downwards and backward. But here you can see that this spine is quadrilateral and strong and directed backward. Okay, it is directed backward. So this is the strong spine of the lumbar vertebrae. Now if you see the transverse process here, transverse process, they are small and tapering. You can see here the transverse process, they are small and tapering, and as we go lower down they will still become smaller. This is the L4. Here the transverse process are thin, flattened, and they are small. Okay, this is the L2 vertebrae, and here the transverse process is long. Okay, it is long. So these were the 7 processes which were attached to the vertebral arch or that of the neural arch. Now in the vertebral foramina there lies the dura mater, arachnoid mater, and up to the lower border of L1 there is the tip of the spinal cord or the conus medullaris is present. Beyond the L1 then it is only the arachnoid and pia mater and subarachnoid space where there is the presence of cauda equina. Okay, it is present there. So this is a description of a typical lumbar vertebrae. Let us see the atypical lumbar, and I said that atypical lumbar vertebrae means the 5th lumbar vertebrae. So the 5th lumbar vertebrae has its features different than that of the typical, and we will try to see what is difference between typical and atypical. This is a typical and this is an atypical. Okay, I will just keep it here like this. This is the typical lumbar vertebrae from 1 to L1 to L4. Okay, and this is the 5th lumbar vertebrae which is classified as an atypical lumbar vertebrae. Okay, now let us study the atypical lumbar vertebrae here. Now when we see this atypical lumbar vertebrae, body is very large as compared to the typical. You can see this, they are say from the same body. Okay, so body is much more larger as compared to this. Okay, so this is again a almost kidney shaped, but here the transverse diameter is much more as compared to that of the anteroposterior diameter. Again the concavity is seen on the lateral aspect and onto the anterior aspect of the body. Upper surface and lower surface of body, they are attached to the intervertebral disc, okay, to form the symphysial joint. Okay, the posterior surface of the body is flat, and the anterior, lateral and posterior surface similar to that of the typical will show the foraminas for the passage of the blood vessels, right? So this is about body, but you should note that the body is very, massive or big. Another feature, okay, you can realize that if you see it from lateral aspect, the anterior margin, distance from superior border to inferior border of the body is more as compared to the distance on the posterior surface of the body. That means posteriorly the height of the body is less as compared to anterior, and this contributes to the convexity of the anterior convexity of the lumbar curvature, to the lumbar curvature. Let us see the vertebral arch. And if we see the vertebral arch or the neural arch, which consists of the pedicle and lamina, then we will see that here the pedicle is very massive and the lamina is quite broad, you can see. And where in the typical, the distance between the two articular, superior articular process was more and that of two inferior was less, it is reverse here. The distance between two superior articular process is less as compared to the distance between the two inferior articular process, and lamina is very thick. The spine is again smaller as compared to that of the typical lumbar vertebrae. See the size of the spine, and slightly it is directed downward. Okay, it is directed. But the superior articular facets, they are still directing posteromedially and they are concave. And similarly, the inferior articular facet, they are also convex and directed anterolaterally. Okay, so they are directed anterolaterally. Okay, that much convexity is not seen here as it was seen in the case of the typical inferior articular facet. Okay, they were much more convex, okay, as compared to that of the this. Okay, but here they are more flat because they will form a joint with the superior articular process of the sacrum. Okay, of the sacrum. So lumbosacral joint will be, and that's why the size of the facet is bigger here. Okay, in the case of the fifth lumbar vertebra or the atypical vertebra. Okay, when we come to the transverse process, we will see that transverse process are small and they are very massive. Okay, they are important structure which should be remembered to identify the fifth is that here the transverse process is taking origin from the lateral aspect of the body, from the whole of the lateral surface of the pedicle going right up to the superior articular process. So the base of the transverse process is quite big, which is not here in case of the typical lumbar vertebrae. You see that the transverse process was taking origin at the junction of the pedicle and lamina, okay, where superior articular process was projecting upward. From that junction it was taking. But if you will see here, the process here of the atypical, this is quite thick and it is taking origin from the side of the body, lateral aspect of the body, and then the whole of the lateral surface of the pedicle. This is the transverse process. So that is the very much, different morphology or structure than that of the typical. Beside that, the body is, the whole of the vertebra is very massive, okay, very big. And the triangular vertebral foramina is smaller as compared to that of the other vertebra, okay. They will be relatively smaller here. Here they see this foramina. This is quite big as compared to that. Compared to that, it's massive body, okay, massive body. So this is the fifth lumbar vertebrae. So this completes the lumbar characteristic of the lumbar vertebrae, where L1 to L4 are typical and L5 is an atypical lumbar vertebrae, okay, because it has a broad origin of the transverse process extending from body towards that of the superior articular process. The whole of the lateral surface of pedicle gives origin of the this. But when you just articulate the two typical or atypical, typical lumbar vertebrae, let me articulate the yes, when you articulate the two adjacent lumbar vertebrae, then you will see that this will, on lateral side, when you will observe it, this will form a foramina, okay, and this foramina is called as intervertebral foramina. See this foramina on lateral aspect, inter, which is bounded above by the pedicle above, below by the pedicle of the lower vertebrae, and on the sides by the body and intervertebral disc, and posteriorly by the articular facets. Okay, articular facet. So this is that intervertebral foramina will be forming, and this gives passage to the spinal nerve and the lumbar vessels. Okay, lumbar vessels. Okay, which will go into the vertebral canal. It will go into the vertebral canal, and then you can see here this notch which forms the upper part of the intervertebral foramina is the vertebral notch. Okay, this is quite deep, okay, below the pedicle, but above the pedicle it is very shallow. Okay, that should be noted. Okay, so this completes the morphological or bony features of the lumbar vertebrae, including typical and atypical. Thank you very much for watching this video.